Here's an extract from one of the earliest manuscripts of the Amores. There are no illustrations, and it's all a little bit messy with variant readings. For example, fama has the alternative reading forma written over it, and a whole couplet has been missed out and inserted sideways by a later hand with the medieval equivalent of an asterisk to mark where it should be inserted. But it's not in any way difficult to read, though it does get off to a bad start with the word femina corrupted to femina as the first word on the page. Now, this manuscript has a very interesting history. It's called the Berlin Hamilton manuscript because, for one thing, it's in Berlin, and secondly, it once belonged to Lord Hamilton, the British ambassador to the court of Naples at the end of the 18th century. It's rather ironic that a manuscript of poetry advocating extramarital affairs should belong to this particular collector, since Lord Hamilton's wife, Lady Hamilton, was notoriously the mistress of Horatio Nelson, the British admiral who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar. The manuscript was sold at Sotheby's in the late 1880s, but it was wrongly labelled as being not a manuscript of the 9th or 10th century, which is what it is, but of the 14th century, and 14th century manuscripts attract very little attention. It was bought as part of a lot by the Prussian government and taken off to Berlin, where it languished in the National Museum for several generations until it was liberated to Leningrad by the Russians in 1945, along with much other material from the museum. It was subsequently returned to East Germany as a gesture of goodwill, but its significance was still not known until an experienced paleographer inspected it and realized immediately, it's absolutely obvious, he realized immediately its true value as one of the best witnesses to Ovid's amatory works. Now, a collation of its most significant readings was published very quickly by the great Franco Munari. Here's a sample. And what do we find at line 21 of the second poem in Book 1? Pacem veniamque, not the then universally accepted reading. I'll come back to this point. But the Hamilton manuscript is superior both in significance and in looks to just about all the other manuscripts of Ovid's amatory works. Here, briefly, is a more typical example. It's a 15th century manuscript now in Edinburgh. It's much more scruffy, and it's full of abbreviations and quite difficult to read. Now, once you have access to the manuscripts, you need to collate them. Here's a picture from my own collation book. Each letter or combination of letters of the alphabet refers to a particular manuscript. And look especially at 1-2-21, and you should be able to see that Pacem veniamque is actually found in more manuscripts than Veniam Pacemque. So why has it not always been the accepted reading? As I said, I'll come back to this point. Now, given the condition of so many manuscripts, reading them can sometimes be a fairly grim task. I tried to make the best of it by restricting myself to a couple of hours every day, for it can be hard on the eyes and it's certainly hard on the brain. Every evening for several months after dinner, when bedtime stories were over and my sons were asleep, I would project the microfilms onto the dining room wall and off I'd go, noting significant readings as I read through. Our cat loved this time of night, for he'd sit on my lap, and I strongly recommend this as a research tool, for I'm sure that sitting there like James Bond's friend Blofeld kept me focused while I was trudging through the microfilms. Now, once we have the manuscript evidence, how do we present it in a text that makes it as accessible as possible to readers? Well, styles in apparatus criticism have changed considerably over the centuries. Here's the 1727 edition of Ovid by Peter Berman. Now, this is a typical page, and as you can see, there actually isn't a critical apparatus designed for the reporting of manuscript readings. Such information is incorporated into the notes on the individual couplets written in Latin at the bottom of the page. At that time, textual criticism was not regarded as a separate process. And I note in passing that Berman has the correct reading, pacem veniamque. But as I say, I'll be coming back to that. Here's the French edition of the Amoris, published in 1930. If you look closely at the Apparatus Criticus, you'll see that the only manuscripts singled out for reference are R and S. These are the two older manuscripts in this passage that were known to the editor. And let's hope that he didn't ignore other manuscripts simply because R is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris and S comes from the French-speaking part of Switzerland. In any case, his apparatus is fairly uninformative.